They laughed when they first saw it, not a polite chuckle, but the kind of laughter that rattled through the humid, mosquito-laden jungle like dry leaves in a storm. Private First Class Daniel Mercer stood with the mail-order rifle cradled against his chest, while his fellow soldiers poked fun at the slender weapon. It was a civilian model, bought months before he enlisted, shipped from a small, obscure catalog company tucked somewhere in Pennsylvania. Its polished walnut stock and narrow barrel made it look almost fragile compared to the official military-issued Gurns and Springfields that gleamed with institutional pride. Men jostled each other, nudged the rifle with their boots, and one of the sergeants raised his eyebrows, smirking. "You planning on hunting squirrels with that thing, Mercer?" Someone sneered. Another added, "Better hope the Japs are dumb enough to line up for you." Mercer said nothing. He had grown used to this sort of derision, a familiar soundtrack in his life that had never earned him anything but quiet patience. Mercer had always been quiet, methodical, a man who preferred action to words. Before the war, he had spent years tracking deer in the Appalachian woods, hunting not for sport but to feed a family struggling against poverty and harsh winters. In those woods, he had learned patience, precision, and the value of observation. Each movement had a purpose. Every shot demanded respect for the weapon, the target, and the distance that separated them. The rifle he carried was an extension of those years, a tool shaped by necessity and familiarity. He trusted it more than any soldier's mockery, more than any sergeant's scowl. And though the men around him saw only a thin, unproven rifle, Mercer saw potential, silent and lethal. The platoon had been on the island for 3 weeks when the first whispers of danger started. Japanese snipers had begun appearing in the treetops, their presence a ghostly threat that had everyone on edge. Men vanished in the night, ambushed while gathering firewood or scouting ahead. The snipers were precise, patient, and invisible, their shots leaving no warning beyond the sharp crack of a rifle and the sudden, terrifying stillness of the jungle. Mercer noticed signs that others ignored, the slight twitch of a leaf, the unnatural stillness of a shadow, the sudden hush of birds that normally filled the canopy with sound. He mentioned these things quietly to a corporal who shrugged and muttered, "Just nerves, Mercer, don't start imagining things." Mercer had learned not to argue. Observation, not opinion, was what counted. By the fourth night, fear had tightened its grip on the platoon. A young private from Iowa, only 18, had been killed while heating water for coffee. The shot came clean through his chest. The coffee cup spilled steaming liquid onto the ground, untouched by human hands. The men began walking with heads down, eyes scanning every branch, every shadow. Helmets tilted forward, weapons ready, hearts pounding. The laughter about Mercer's rifle had stopped. It was replaced by tense curiosity, a subtle shift in perception. If a mail-order rifle could survive the inspection of a civilian market, could it survive the trials of war? Mercer wondered the same thing himself, though he did not speak aloud. That night, as the rest of the platoon slept fitfully, Mercer lay in the mud, cleaning and propping up his rifle. He worked with the patience of a man in familiar territory, adjusting the iron sights, checking the bore, oiling the moving parts. He wrapped the stock with cloth to reduce reflection and muffled the sound of each movement. He did not hurry, knowing that haste was the enemy of precision. Outside, the jungle breathed, alive with unseen eyes, unseen mouths. Mercer listened, attuned to rhythms most soldiers overlooked. The hum of insects, the rustle of leaves, even the subtle drop in temperature when a shadow passed over him. He noted everything. He was learning to read the jungle as if it were a book written in silence and waiting. By dawn, Mercer had his first chance. The sniper had exposed himself by mistake, shifting slightly to aim at a distant patrol. Mercer observed, calculating wind, distance, and angle. He did not panic, even as his pulse quickened. When the moment arrived, he fired. The shot was clean. The sniper fell from his perch, and the jungle swallowed the sound. No one saw Mercer. No one cheered. He remained prone, silent, waiting for the inevitable reaction of others. When the patrol discovered the corpse hours later, disbelief rippled through the ranks. The sniper's body was evidence not only of enemy presence, but of Mercer's skill. Questions followed. Who fired the shot? Where had it come from? The answers were simple, delivered without pride. Mercer spoke quietly, with no need for embellishment, as if he were describing the weather, not a death that had just taken the life of a trained killer. The second sniper appeared that afternoon. Unlike the first, he was confident, firing into the dense foliage with abandon. Mercer noticed the unnatural tilt of the branches, the slight shimmer of a scope glinting in the sun. The sniper aimed at him, though he did not know it yet. Mercer remained motionless, calculating trajectory and distance with the kind of patience that comes from years of experience. When he squeezed the trigger, the shot struck true. The sniper collapsed, eyes wide with the realization that someone had been watching him all along. Mercer did not rise to inspect the body immediately. He waited, knowing that premature movement would draw attention. Observation first, movement second, always. Word of the sniper kills spread quickly, and a subtle shift began among the soldiers. Where once there had been ridicule, now there was wariness, almost reluctant respect. Mercer remained silent, refusing accolades. His focus was on survival and preparation. Every kill taught him something new about the enemy, their patience, their patterns, their predictable moments of overconfidence. Each day sharpened his senses, making him a predator among shadows. The mail-order rifle, once a joke, became an extension of his mind, translating thought into action with deadly accuracy. The soldiers who had mocked him now edged closer in curiosity, sometimes watching silently as he laid in wait for another unseen enemy. None dared speak, fearing the answer might come faster than they could comprehend. Mercer's method became ritualized. He would rise before dawn, scout quietly, and find positions overlooked by both allies and enemies. He would track subtle movements, disturbed leaves, twigs misaligned, shadows that lingered unnaturally. Each shot was deliberate, each moment of observation exacting. By the third day, he had killed 5 snipers, each from different locations, each employing slightly different tactics. He began to understand their patterns, their patience, their psychology. The snipers were disciplined, but they were human. They grew overconfident, made small mistakes, and Mercer was waiting, always waiting. By now, the men around him no longer mocked his rifle. They whispered, "Watch Mercer, he knows what he's doing." Yet even as they observed, he maintained a careful distance, never revealing too much, never inviting reliance. This was his war, his skill, and he would see it through alone if necessary. The 4th day arrived with tension thick enough to choke the air. Japanese snipers were everywhere, yet nowhere could be confirmed. Patrols moved in tight groups, eyes darting constantly, nerves fraying. Mercer lay in a concealed position high above a ridge, watching the canopy, feeling the wind shift in his favor. Shadows played tricks on the eyes, but Mercer had learned to trust his instincts. He spotted the glint of a scope, a subtle rustle in leaves not caused by wind. One sniper, then another, Mercer fired with calculated precision, each bullet a controlled, fatal punctuation in the chaos of the jungle. By the end of that 4th day, he had killed 11 snipers. 11 men who had terrorized his platoon, who had seemed invisible and unstoppable, now lay silent in the undergrowth, claimed not by chance, but by calculation, patience, and mastery of a rifle once mocked. When the platoon finally gathered to assess the day, the change in perception was palpable. The laughter that had once followed Mercer's rifle was gone, replaced by awe and, for some, fear. Men approached him cautiously, asking questions they had never dared to voice before, seeking guidance, tips, even permission to observe him. Mercer remained quiet. The work was not done. He still watched, still calculated, still waited. The mail-order rifle had become more than a weapon. It was a symbol, a reminder that preparation, skill, and patience could transform a tool of mockery into an instrument of survival and dominance. By nightfall, Mercer lay again in the mud, cleaning his rifle, methodical as always, yet his mind was already scanning tomorrow. The jungle was patient, but so was he. Shadows shifted in the moonlight, and he could feel eyes on him even when none were visible. The men who had mocked him now understood, though they might never articulate it, that he had been their shield, their unexpected guardian, their answer to a deadly and invisible enemy. And Mercer, as always, said nothing. He listened, he observed, he prepared. The mail-order rifle had proven itself, but more than that, it had proven him. The laughter was gone. Only silence remained, the quiet acknowledgement of skill honed under fire, a skill that would continue to define the man and the weapon alike in the unforgiving crucible of the Pacific War. The sun rose over the jungle like a warning, orange and harsh, slicing through the mist that clung to the ground. Private Daniel Mercer had already been awake for hours, lying flat against the wet soil, listening to the subtle creaks and whispers of the trees. The previous 4 days had changed everything. His platoon no longer laughed at his mail-order rifle. Now they watched him with a mix of awe and unease, as if they had glimpsed a force they could not fully understand. 11 enemy snipers had fallen by his hand, and yet he felt no pride, only the steady, gnawing weight of responsibility. Every shot carried consequences, every kill a reminder of the predator-prey balance that the Pacific jungles demanded. Mercer moved slowly, methodically, crawling along a narrow ridge where the underbrush was thick enough to conceal him, but not so dense as to trap him. He had learned to feel the jungle, to read it like an open book written in shadows and wind. The subtle change in leaf alignment, the small shiver of a branch under a bird's weight, the faint glint of a scope reflected by the rising sun, each was a clue. He adjusted his rifle, the stock cold and familiar against his cheek. The mail-order weapon, once a source of ridicule, now felt like an extension of his senses. Its slim barrel seemed to hum with possibility, promising precision in a world that had none. By mid-morning, the first challenge of the day presented itself. Mercer spotted movement in the canopy, a Japanese sniper, perched high and silent, scanning the ground for the slightest motion. The man had clearly learned from his fallen comrades, positioning himself carefully, aligning branches to obscure his form. But Mercer's patience, honed over years of hunting in Pennsylvania, gave him an edge. He observed the subtle rhythm of the sniper's breathing, the slight twitch in his scope. One careful calculation, a micro-adjustment for wind and distance, and the rifle cracked. The sniper's body slumped without a sound. The bullet had traveled invisible to anyone watching, unseen, unstoppable. Mercer did not celebrate. He merely adjusted his position, scanning for the next threat. The platoon moved cautiously that afternoon, aware that more snipers remained. Mercer positioned himself above a narrow trail where supply wagons and patrols often passed. Through his scope, he noticed the faint shimmer of another rifle barrel hidden among leaves. This sniper was bolder than the last, firing at supply men without hesitation. Mercer calculated the trajectory, factoring in the incline of the hill, the humidity, even the faint gusts from the ocean breeze. He waited for the perfect alignment, heart steady, finger firm on the trigger. Another clean shot, another enemy removed from the fight. The repeated kills began to affect the enemy's behavior. Japanese snipers became more cautious, more patient, aware that someone was observing their movements. Mercer had turned the tables, using their own discipline against them. By late afternoon, he had accounted for 4 more snipers, each eliminated with the same methodical precision. His reputation, though not openly discussed, spread among the platoon. Soldiers watched from a distance, whispering about the quiet man with the mail-order rifle who could find death hidden in the trees. Yet Mercer remained detached, observing, calculating, never allowing emotion to cloud his judgment. By the 3rd day of intense sniper warfare, the jungle itself seemed to conspire against the platoon. Rain fell in sheets, turning trails into mud rivers and making every movement treacherous. Visibility dropped, shadows lengthened, and the constant threat of ambush weighed on every man. Mercer adapted seamlessly, blending into the environment, letting the storm mask his movements. He relied on listening rather than seeing, feeling the vibrations of footsteps through the sodden earth, detecting changes in bird calls that signaled danger. His rifle, though once mocked, became a trusted ally. The fine barrel and smooth action allowed him to make adjustments in challenging conditions, and the wooden stock absorbed recoil in a way that made repeated shots manageable. That evening, as the storm subsided, Mercer prepared for the final phase of the day. He positioned himself near a ridge that overlooked a narrow clearing, knowing that snipers would often take these predictable paths. He lay motionless for hours, watching, listening, waiting. One by one, he detected the subtle signs of movement, twigs breaking, leaves brushing unnaturally, a faint glimmer of a scope. Each time he calculated, adjusted, and fired. By the end of the day, he had eliminated 3 more snipers, bringing the total to 11 over 4 days. Mercer's skills had transformed the platoon's approach to the enemy. They had begun to rely on his observations, asking him to scout ahead, to identify safe paths, to predict sniper positions. Yet Mercer refused to lead openly, preferring to act alone. He understood that trust was fragile and that exposure increased vulnerability. The mail-order rifle, quiet and unassuming, allowed him to remain hidden while delivering decisive results. Each sniper eliminated was a lesson in patience, strategy, and psychological warfare. The men around him began to change as well. Ridicule had vanished, replaced by a combination of fear, respect, and dependence. Soldiers who had once mocked his weapon now lingered at the edge of his field of vision, watching silently, absorbing his methods without instruction. Mercer did not speak of pride or skill. He spoke only of observation, of movement, of patience. His quiet demeanor masked a fierce intellect, a strategic mind honed by necessity and honed further by the unforgiving demands of jungle warfare. During brief moments of rest, Mercer reflected on the cost of his actions. 11 lives had been taken, and each had required precision, timing, and the willingness to remain still for hours, sometimes days. The psychological burden was heavy, though he did not share it. He knew that the jungle demanded more than skill. It demanded resolve, clarity, and an unwavering commitment to survival. The mail-order rifle, once a subject of derision, had become a symbol of that commitment. It had proven itself not through military authority, but through results, through the silent confirmation of death delivered with accuracy and patience. By the fourth night, the platoon had adopted a cautious reverence for Mercer. They moved differently, spoke quietly, and watched his methods. The laughter that had once followed the sight of his weapon had vanished entirely. Mercer, for his part, continued as before, observing, calculating, waiting. The jungle was still alive with unseen threats, and every rustle of leaves or glint of sunlight through the canopy could signal danger. He did not allow himself the luxury of satisfaction or complacency. Each sniper he eliminated was a step toward safety for the men around him, yet he remained keenly aware that one miscalculation could mean his own death. Mercer's mind was as disciplined as his aim. He considered the psychology of the enemy, predicting how overconfidence, hunger, and fatigue could influence behavior. He studied patterns, noting how snipers tended to repeat certain actions when under stress or when observing potential prey. This understanding allowed him to anticipate moves before they occurred, to strike not from reaction, but from preemptive insight. Each shot was more than a test of marksmanship. It was a calculated manipulation of human behavior, a deadly chess game played in the shadows of the jungle. By dawn of the fifth day, Mercer had settled into a rhythm. He moved with the stealth of a shadow, invisible yet observant. His mail-order rifle rested lightly on his shoulder, ready to translate thought into action. The men of his platoon had begun to refer to him quietly as the hunter, though they dared not say it aloud. There was a growing understanding that the rifle was not simply a tool, but an extension of a mind that could read the jungle, predict human behavior, and deliver lethal precision. The transformation from mockery to reverence was complete, though Mercer himself remained unchanged. He was still the quiet, methodical man who preferred observation to conversation, patience to haste, and action to spectacle. By the fifth day, the jungle itself seemed almost alive, a vast, breathing entity that Mercer had learned to respect and fear in equal measure. The thick canopy muted sound, turning every footstep into a question and every shadow into a potential threat. After 4 days of eliminating enemy snipers, Mercer's reputation within the platoon was no longer whispered rumor, but quiet certainty. The men moved differently now, cautious and watchful, deferring to his instincts without knowing precisely why. Yet for Mercer, there was no comfort in recognition. Each kill, each observation, each careful calculation was a reminder that the jungle did not forgive mistakes. One misjudged movement, one slight miscalculation in wind or distance, and death could come for him as easily as it had for the enemy. The day began with low-hanging fog, tendrils of mist weaving through twisted vines and leaning trees. Mercer's position was high, perched on a ridge that gave him a clear line of sight across a narrow valley where patrols often passed. Through the fog, he could just make out shapes shifting unnaturally among the leaves. Enemy snipers were adaptive, learning from the deaths of their comrades. They had begun to vary their positions, change the rhythm of their patrols, and conceal themselves more effectively. Yet Mercer's patience, his ability to observe without being observed, remained his greatest weapon. He adjusted his scope, noting subtle differences in foliage movement and shadow alignment. He tracked the faint metallic glint of a rifle barrel and waited for the perfect alignment. The first shot of the day rang out as a sharp crack through the mist, and a sniper fell silently into the undergrowth. Mercer did not move, did not breathe more heavily than necessary, and immediately scanned for the next threat. The enemy, learning from previous failures, had split into small groups, a tactic designed to confuse and overwhelm. Mercer anticipated this, calculating where each sniper was likely to emerge, predicting patterns from subtle hints, a disturbed vine, a slight twitch in a branch, a flicker of movement through dense foliage. By mid-morning, 3 more snipers had been eliminated, each shot delivered with the same precision, the same calm deliberation, the same deadly certainty. The psychological toll on the platoon was evident. Soldiers who had once joked about Mercer's rifle now moved with almost ritualistic caution, keeping low, scanning constantly, and speaking only in whispers. Fear and respect intertwined, creating a tense atmosphere where every sound was suspect and every shadow held potential death. Mercer observed the shift with quiet detachment. He had always understood the power of perception in warfare, the way fear could shape behavior, the way respect could command obedience without words. The platoon's reliance on him was growing, yet he remained detached, unwilling to allow dependence to erode the discipline that had kept him alive. By afternoon, the enemy had adapted further. Snipers became more mobile, repositioning frequently to avoid detection. Mercer noted the change and adjusted his approach. He moved slowly, silently, using the natural contours of the ridge to mask his movements. Each step was calculated, each pause deliberate. He listened not just with ears, but with the subtle vibrations of the earth, the faint shifts in air pressure, and the almost imperceptible change in wildlife behavior. A flock of birds startled by a passing enemy patrol, a lizard scuttling too quickly across the soil, the rustle of leaves in a direction inconsistent with the wind, all were indicators that danger was near. Mercer used them to his advantage, positioning himself for a series of carefully orchestrated shots that would dismantle the enemy's offensive without exposing himself. The 4th sniper kill of the day came from a precarious perch, nearly impossible for most soldiers to access. Mercer had crawled along a narrow ridge, balancing on wet roots and loose soil, inching closer to the enemy's line of sight without detection. When the target appeared, he waited for the microsecond when the sun reflected off the scope, giving him the perfect aiming point. The shot was executed flawlessly, and the sniper slumped silently, the fog swallowing the sound. Mercer did not celebrate. There was no triumph, no thrill, only focus. The jungle demanded vigilance, and any lapse could be fatal. As the day wore on, Mercer's awareness extended beyond immediate threats. He observed the psychological state of both his platoon and the enemy. Japanese snipers were becoming cautious, hesitant, their overconfidence replaced by fear and frustration. Mercer predicted their movements, anticipated their attempts at ambush, and intercepted them before they could strike again. The soldiers around him, though physically closer now, still did not fully understand his methods. They saw results, but not process, death delivered without hesitation, without emotional interference, without error. Mercer understood that their survival depended not on understanding his tactics, but on trusting them implicitly, silently. Nightfall brought no relief. The jungle's darkness was oppressive, filled with the sounds of unseen predators and distant artillery. Mercer took position along a ridge overlooking a narrow clearing, anticipating nocturnal movement. The enemy, aware of his deadly efficiency, attempted to lure him into traps, leaving bait positions and false trails. Mercer detected the deception through subtle anomalies, the unnatural alignment of leaves, the repeated placement of objects, the faint pattern of footprints inconsistent with the jungle floor. He navigated the terrain with care, eliminating snipers one by one, using shadows as concealment and silence as a weapon. Each kill reinforced his reputation, yet Mercer remained unaffected by it, his mind focused solely on the task at hand, survival and precision. By the end of the 5th day, Mercer had accounted for 3 additional snipers, bringing his total for the engagement to 14 enemy combatants neutralized. The platoon, exhausted and tense, moved with unprecedented caution and coordination, guided indirectly by Mercer's silent example. Soldiers whispered about him in hushed tones, calling him the Shadow or the Hunter, but he did not acknowledge the monikers. He did not require validation. Each action was a step in a continuous cycle of observation, patience, calculation, and execution. The mail-order rifle, once mocked, had proven itself more than adequate in the unforgiving environment of the Pacific jungle. It had become a symbol of skill and determination, a tool that translated human discipline into deadly effectiveness. Despite the tangible success, Mercer felt the weight of each life taken. The jungle exacted a psychological toll as severe as its physical dangers. He had killed men who were skilled, disciplined, and patient. Each required focus, anticipation, and a willingness to remain still for hours, sometimes days. The burden was not in the act itself, but in the responsibility it carried, the understanding that every action had consequences, that survival for his platoon depended on his continued vigilance. Mercer did not speak of it, did not allow himself to dwell on the moral weight of his actions. Silence and focus were his tools, as essential as the rifle he wielded. The sixth day brought renewed challenges. Enemy snipers adapted yet again, using decoys and diversions to split attention. Mercer noted these tactics and responded with careful strategy, anticipating ambushes and repositioning to intercept threats before they materialized. The mail-order rifle, with its precise barrel and smooth action, allowed him to respond with exacting accuracy, even under extreme stress. Each shot reinforced the pattern he had established: observation first, calculation second, execution third. By evening, 3 more snipers had fallen to his disciplined approach, further cementing his role as a pivotal figure in the platoon's survival. Mercer's impact extended beyond the physical battlefield. The psychological effect on the enemy was profound. Snipers became hesitant, their once confident movements now cautious and tentative. They began to doubt their own instincts, aware that an unseen force was observing, calculating, and ready to strike. Mercer had turned the hunter into the hunted, exploiting overconfidence and discipline to devastating effect. Within his platoon, the change was equally noticeable. Soldiers moved with more purpose, relied on observation over instinct, and deferred to Mercer's silent authority. The laughter that had once accompanied the sight of his mail-order rifle was long gone. In its place was a quiet acknowledgement of skill, discipline, and lethal competence. By nightfall, Mercer once again cleaned his rifle with meticulous care, methodically checking each component, adjusting sights, and ensuring readiness for the next day. Though the immediate threat had subsided, he knew the jungle never slept. The environment was alive with danger, and any lapse could be fatal. He reflected on the 4 days of relentless engagement, the 11 snipers eliminated, and the evolving relationship with his platoon. He understood that survival depended not on brute force, but on discipline, patience, and the quiet mastery of observation. The mail-order rifle had become more than a weapon. It was a conduit for focus, strategy, and precision, a tool that allowed a quiet man to command the chaos of war. The 7th day broke with an oppressive humidity that seemed to press against every soldier like a tangible weight. Mercer had been awake for hours before dawn, lying flat against the damp soil, scanning the tree line with a practiced eye. The previous 4 days had transformed him from a mocked private with a civilian rifle into a silent force of reckoning, feared and respected by both enemy and platoon alike. The 11 snipers he had eliminated had left a profound mark on the morale of the Japanese forces, but Mercer knew instinctively that the fight was far from over. The jungle demanded vigilance, and one small mistake could undo everything. He moved with absolute precision, each step calculated to avoid the slightest rustle that might betray his position. Rain had softened the earth, muffling some sounds while creating deceptive noises elsewhere. Mercer relied on all his senses, the faint vibrations beneath his palms, the subtle difference in the way leaves shifted, the almost imperceptible glint of metal in the distance. This was no longer a game of reflexive shooting. It was a battle of anticipation, a silent war of patience and perception. His mail-order rifle, once the butt of jokes, now felt like a natural extension of his mind, translating observation into deadly action with unparalleled accuracy. By mid-morning, he had identified movement at 3 separate points across the clearing below, a coordinated attempt by the enemy to regain control of the area. These snipers were not novices, They were trained, disciplined, and desperate. Mercer adjusted his breathing, calculated wind speed, humidity, and trajectory, and fired. One by one, the 3 targets fell. Each shot was deliberate, each kill executed with a precision honed by years of hunting, months of preparation, and 4 days of relentless combat. The jungle swallowed the sound of each bullet, leaving only silence and the subtle shift in the canopy that marked a fallen enemy. The platoon, observing from positions below, had begun to move with a reverence bordering on fear. Soldiers whispered about Mercer's uncanny skill, but none dared speak too loudly. They followed his indirect guidance, moving along paths he had identified as safe, avoiding areas where enemy fire might strike. The transformation from ridicule to respect was complete. Mercer's quiet authority had become a stabilizing force for the men around him. Yet he remained detached, focused solely on observation and execution. The jungle demanded nothing less, and complacency could be fatal. By afternoon, Mercer's skills were tested further. The enemy had begun to use decoys and false positions, attempting to lure him into exposure. He recognized the pattern quickly: leaves disturbed unnaturally, branches that seemed aligned for observation rather than growth, footprints inconsistent with the terrain. These were not mistakes, but deliberate manipulations designed to test him. Mercer did not hesitate. He moved slowly along a ridge, adjusting his scope and calculating angles until he identified the true threat. A sniper perched precariously above a rocky outcrop. One clean shot ended the man's life before he could respond. The remaining decoys were revealed by the absence of subtle physiological signs: no twitching of muscles, no micro-adjustment of scope. Mercer eliminated them systematically, each shot reinforcing his reputation as a force of inevitability. As evening approached, the platoon faced its final test. Japanese snipers had coordinated a concentrated attack, hopping to ambush the Americans during the transition to night. Mercer positioned himself strategically, using high ground and natural concealment to anticipate enemy movement. The rifle, precise and familiar, allowed him to engage multiple targets across varying distances, maintaining accuracy and control even under mounting pressure. Each shot required not just aim, but an understanding of enemy psychology, their tendencies, their predictable movements, their subtle mistakes under stress. By the end of the day, he had neutralized the remaining threat, bringing the total number of enemy snipers eliminated over 4 days to 11. The platoon gathered afterward, exhausted but alive. The atmosphere was surreal. The soldiers who had once mocked Mercer's rifle now looked upon him with silent awe. Some approached cautiously, touching the stock, examining the weapon that had become legendary through results rather than reputation. Mercer did not speak of the killings or of the rifle's performance. His satisfaction was private, born not of pride, but of the knowledge that his skill had kept his comrades alive. The mail-order rifle, once a source of ridicule, had become a symbol of resilience, patience, and lethal precision. It had proven that preparation, discipline, and understanding of one's environment could triumph over conventional expectations. Yet even as he cleaned the rifle that night, Mercer felt the weight of what had transpired. 11 lives had been taken, 11 enemies eliminated through a combination of skill, patience, and observation. Each shot had required not only marksmanship but psychological acuity, understanding patterns, predicting behavior, and maintaining absolute composure. The jungle had been an unforgiving teacher, relentless in its demand for attention and precision. Mercer understood that the mail-order rifle was not magical, not inherently superior. It was merely an instrument that amplified his own abilities. Without discipline, focus, and experience, it would have been no more effective than any other weapon in the world. Platoon moved differently in the days that followed. Soldiers remained cautious, aware that threats could emerge at any moment, and aware that Mercer's silent vigilance was a stabilizing factor. The stories of the mail-order rifle spread through the unit, whispered among men who had once scoffed, now speaking in reverent tones of the private who had transformed the odds in their favor. Yet Mercer himself remained the same quiet, focused man, observing, calculating, waiting. Recognition did not alter him. The jungle remained indifferent, and in that indifference lay both danger and opportunity. Reflecting on the events of the past 4 days, Mercer recognized the broader implications of his actions. Skill alone had not guaranteed survival. Strategy, patience, and understanding of human behavior had been equally important. The mail-order rifle had been merely a tool, but his ability to translate observation into action had made it formidable. He had turned a weapon that was once mocked into a decisive instrument of survival. More importantly, he had taught himself, through action, the limits of patience, the value of calm under pressure, and the critical importance of timing and perception in combat. By the fifth night, as the platoon settled in for rest, Mercer cleaned his rifle meticulously, methodical as always. Every component was examined, every sight checked, every surface polished. The weapon had proven itself in the most extreme conditions, yet he treated it with the same discipline as when it first arrived by mail. This was not mere habit, it was survival. In the jungle, small oversights could be fatal, and a well-maintained weapon was an extension of the mind, a bridge between thought and action. Mercer understood that the rifle had become part of him, and he part of it, a symbiosis forged in the crucible of combat. When he finally rested, the jungle around him seemed quieter, though only for a moment. The danger had not disappeared, it had merely receded. Yet Mercer allowed himself a rare moment of reflection, thinking about the journey from ridicule to respect, from obscurity to indispensability. The men who had mocked his mail-order rifle now deferred to his judgment, followed his lead, and depended on his vigilance. Mercer did not boast or revel in this transformation. Instead, he understood that his role had been earned through discipline, observation, and action, the fundamental principles of survival and combat effectiveness. The 4 days of relentless engagement had left an indelible mark on both Mercer and the platoon. 11 enemy snipers had been eliminated, but more importantly, a culture of discipline, observation, and respect for skill had been established. The mail-order rifle, once a symbol of ridicule, had become a tool of mastery, a reminder that preparation, patience, and careful calculation could overcome expectations and even alter the course of survival in a hostile environment. Mercer had proven that a quiet man with a humble weapon, guided by skill and understanding, could command both fear and respect in equal measure. As the sun set over the jungle, Mercer lay quietly, rifle at his side, eyes scanning the darkening canopy. The 4 days of sniper warfare had tested every aspect of his abilities: marksmanship, patience, observation, and psychological insight. The mail-order rifle had delivered, but it was Mercer's discipline, calm, and understanding of the jungle that had truly ensured survival. In the silence of the evening, with the men of his platoon around him finally breathing easier, he understood that the weapon had done more than eliminate enemies. It had reshaped perception, altered behavior, and turned mockery into awe. The rifle and the man were now inseparable, a quiet testament to skill, patience, and the harsh lessons of war. Mercer would never forget those days, nor would the platoon. The mail-order rifle had transcended its humble beginnings, becoming a symbol of precision, patience, and lethal efficiency. And Mercer, who had once been mocked, had become the silent guardian, the hunter in the shadows, the embodiment of calm amidst chaos. The jungle had demanded vigilance, and he had delivered. 11 snipers had fallen, 4 days had passed, and a quiet man with a humble rifle had proven that skill, patience, and observation could triumph where brute force alone might fail. The legend of Mercer and his mail-order rifle would endure long after the echoes of gunfire faded, a reminder that mastery often lies not in the tools we are given, but in how we use them.